Every investor wishes they had a crystal ball, and this video is going to be the closest thing I can give you to a crystal ball. In this video, we're going to talk about Michael Burry, the man who predicted the housing crash of 2008. We're going to talk about his latest prediction and how you can think just like him. And it has nothing to do with how smart you are. Many people think that Michael Burry is just smarter than everybody else. But I'm going to show you how you can think just like Michael Burry in order to be able to be a better investor, to be more profitable, and to feel more confident in yourself and achieve the results that you deserve. So if you like the direction of this video so far, click like, click subscribe, and hit the notification bell so we can inform you of more amazing videos as we upload them. Okay, this is exciting because we're going to think like Michael Burry, or insert your favorite investor here, and becoming a genius. So, becoming an investment genius. Today we're going to have a look at Michael Burry's prediction, how you could make a prediction just like Michael, believe it or not, how he might have done it, and how to profit from thinking like Michael Burry. So what is Michael Burry's prediction? His prediction is for hyperinflation in the USA, similar to Germany in the 1920s, Zimbabwe not that long ago, and Somalia, just like in this picture, where there's a man with a wheelbarrow full of money that is practically worthless, and all he can get for it is a loaf of bread. So we'll go more into details about inflation and how to know whether there will be inflation and how you protect yourself as an investor from hyperinflation. But before we go into the details of what Michael Burry does, I want to prepare you very quickly. So you probably know this quote, and you need to find your genius in order to be able to become like Michael Burry. And I'm going to show you that you have that genius inside of you. So I'm going to give you a very quick example. I speak quite a few languages, and I was interviewed about this a few weeks ago. And we spoke about the fact that some people are good at languages, some people less good at languages. And when you're not so good at languages, it's usually because you don't have the interest. You've run into a problem in the past, and you're blocking yourself off from that intelligence. I usually like to say that interest and motivation equals intelligence. So let's say that now this person who's not so good at language, they meet somebody that they start a romantic relationship with. All of a sudden they're interested in the culture, they're interested in the person, they're interested in the language perhaps as well. And so as they start having this motivation to want to be able to speak to them in that language, they find their intelligence along the way, and mainly it comes from that interest. So the same is true for investing. You need to find out what you're interested in order to be able to become a better investor by understanding how it works and by going into the details that might bore you at the moment. So the more interest you have, the more questions you ask, the more you're going to be interested, and the more your intelligence is going to come out. Now it's time to find that interest and tap into that intelligence and turn into your own version of Michael Burry. Have a quick think about why you want to learn this and how it's going to benefit your investing, and then let's get into the analysis. I came up with the idea for this video when a friend of mine shared this graph on Facebook. This graph is called the M1 money stock, and it shows how much money there is, notes and coins, in circulation. This is in America, and he was talking about the fact that he thought there was a conspiracy because this graph is being discontinued, and you can see here this series will no longer be updated. But I went and had a look and found that there's actually a link to the update. So let's quickly go to that update, and then we'll have a look at this graph. Now, it is very interesting what this graph shows, because it shows us that the amount of notes and coins in circulation from 1960 is about $139 billion in the late 90s or early 90s, we just passed $1 trillion. So here in December 1992, we're at $1 trillion. And this takes us all the way up to December 2019, when we just hit $4 trillion. So you can see it's taken quite a long time to go from 149 billion to $4 trillion. But now, in the last year, this graph has skyrocketed to about $18 trillion just in 1 year alone. Some people think just printing more and more money is going to automatically cause inflation, but that's not actually the case. Let's have a quick look at a simple example of money supply and inflation. So you can see we have 5 years in the table, and we have a number of widgets. We have money supply, an average price which we can calculate from a number of widgets and the money supply, and we can calculate the inflation rate. Now, we won't go into the numbers too much, but what I do want to share is that from 2000 to 2001, the number of widgets, which could be the equivalent to GDP, increases by 20%. Now, our money supply also increases by 20%. So that means that people don't notice that there's more money, and so the average price remains the same for all the goods. We have zero inflation. However, in 2003, the output of widgets increases by 14%, but the money supply increases by 42%. Now, generally, this price increase happens not because people actually calculate what the price should be, but because people just notice that there's a bit more money around. They start charging a little bit more. Usually the government controls that by not printing too much, and the money supply only has a small rate of inflation. Usually they try and keep it below 3%. But in this case, with our 14% increase in GDP and 42% increase of money supply, we have an inflation rate of 25%. And in 2004, it goes even higher to 33%. The only thing I want to add to this simple example is that another reason why we get high inflation rates is not only because the money supply grows faster than the number of widgets produced or the GDP, it's also because people start to distrust the government. As I got into this, I started to do more and more research. And there was different people that were saying that there is a chance of hyperinflation, but there's also a lot of people, also very smart people, who say that there is very little chance of hyperinflation. And it brought me back to the M1 graph. So my friend said that it was being discontinued, but I found out that it was being continued. But there are more graphs around how much money there is. There's also the M2. Now the M2 shows not only how many notes and coins there are, but also how many savings people have. So this one also, of course, is going to grow. The details of this graph are only from 1980. So obviously you can only see the steeper curve, but you can see that there's still a big curve at the end. Now this graph is also discontinued, but there's a link to the new one. However, the graph that they use to calculate inflation is called the MZM. And this one is discontinued, but there is no link to the new information. Now, the MZM shows us how many notes and coins there are, how many short-term savings there are, but also other assets that can very quickly be turned to liquid assets, that can be turned into cash. So this amount is much higher, but this is the one that they use to calculate inflation, to see whether there is too much money stock in supply. And this graph is being discontinued. And this then works in the favor of Michael Burry. If the government is going to hide the amount of money that they are producing, how much money there is available in the short term, it makes it difficult for us to know how much there is, and that could lead to inflation. But of course, it isn't certain. Another indicator that shows that there could be a problem is called velocity of circulation of money. And this is the graph of Germany in the 1920s. What this shows is how quickly people are converting their money into goods. If prices aren't rising, you can hold on to your money for a while and go and buy the thing that you want to buy later. There's no hurry. But when you have hyperinflation, your $100 today might buy a loaf of bread, but tomorrow you have to pay $500 for a loaf of bread. The day after you might have to pay $1,000 for a loaf of bread. So it's better to take your money and spend it immediately on something of value rather than waiting and only being able to buy maybe a quarter of a loaf of bread with the same amount of money. So you can see that in Germany, the velocity of circulation of money was very high and people were converting their money into goods as quickly as possible. Now, if you compare that to the United States, we have the graph from 1960, and the velocity of money was going up until the 1980s, and then it has been going down ever since. And finally, I want to show you the actual calculation we saw at the very beginning when I explained the simple example. So here we have gross domestic product, which is the same as the number of widgets being produced. And we're going to edit the graph and add something in. So we'll add a line here. And we'll put in the MZM. And we'll add the data series. That should add an extra line in. There we go. So, as we said at the very beginning, when our gross domestic product is growing at the same rate as the money stock, we have no inflation. If it overtakes, then there is a chance of inflation. And as we can see here, it starts to catch up, but we'll zoom in a little bit because it's a little bit difficult to see. Zoom, 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 zoom. Oops. Oh, that was a bit too much. Okay, we'll go in a little bit more. Okay, so as you can see, the money supply went up faster than gross domestic product did, and it actually overtook it for a while, and now they are quite similar. So technically speaking, that should lead to higher inflation. Okay, let's quickly recap. We had a look at MZM, which is being discontinued, which is a negative sign because it means that we're not going to be able to see the graph that shows us whether inflation is under control or not. We had a look at velocity of money, which is going down, so that's a good sign for inflation. But this graph is also going to be discontinued, so we won't know what will happen after this. So that's a bad sign. We've got gross domestic product, which has been overtaken by money stock. It's now more or less caught up again, but they're at about the same level. Not a very good sign, so that's probably 3 strikes. But if we have a look at inflation data in the US, and this will go all the way through to 2019. So in the 70s it was high, it went back down in the 80s, it was the lowest it's ever been in 1990, it actually went negative, it was low in 2015, and it has just dropped at 2019. But we don't know what will happen after this. This is definitely one to keep an eye on. But having said that, even if inflation stays low, it's important to realize that governments can actually cheat around this. I don't want to say anything bad about the US government because they're probably keeping an eye on me anyhow. But it is possible for governments to make inflation figures look better than they are. And there are some rumors out there that say that this might be happening at the moment based on what I just told you in our recap. So how do governments do this? Well, they measure inflation through CPI. So they call it the Consumer Price Index. They buy a basket of goods. It's always the same. And sometimes they do it in the city, sometimes in urban areas. They have all these different calculations to see where the prices are going up. So in one of these baskets, they might have 3 steaks, 2 packs of milk, and 2 cartons of eggs. And they'll compare the price of those 6 months later and 6 months later again to see whether the prices are increasing and by how much to calculate inflation levels. Now, there are a couple of different ways in which you can cheat with this, and one of them is that instead of having 3 steaks, we're going to reduce it to 2 steaks, and if it's still too expensive, we reduce it to just 1 steak, whereby we're weighting one of the items less, which causes the prices to go up by less than people expect. Now, there's another way of doing this, where instead of putting beef into this basket, we put chicken, because chicken might be cheaper and the prices aren't going up for chicken. So if we put chicken into this basket, we're still doing our CPI, we're still publishing the results, but we're not really being completely honest with it, and it can make inflation seem much lower than it actually is. If this is going on, and if enough people find out about it, then the trust in the government can get lost. This is the same thing as many people now start to know, that the government will actually start propping up the stock market when there is a crisis. When prices drop too steeply, the government will actually use the Federal Reserve to buy stocks in order to prop up the stock market. It takes a lot for a whole population to lose the trust of its government, but it can certainly happen, and that is definitely one thing that will lead to hyperinflation. Now I've changed you from you to Michael Burry. I have to magically make sure that you read this disclaimer, and maybe you can like and leave a comment if you've read the disclaimer so that you can prove to me that you've done it, so that I can't get into trouble. So I'll just let you read that for a few seconds. Hit pause if I didn't give you enough time, but make sure you read this. And now comes the most important part, how you can profit from this and how you can figure out what to do if hyperinflation does come. So here are the winners in hyperinflation: people who borrow money, such as business owners and landowners, people with mortgages, because they're able to pay their loans back more easily with worthless money, people with wages. As long as they keep renegotiating their wages every day, they're okay, until prices even go beyond what wages are doing. Farmers usually do well because their products are going to remain in demand because people have to keep eating. And the people that generally lose are the people that are on fixed incomes, like students, pensioners, people that are sick, and people who are savings and who've lent money, for example, to the government. They're the ones who are going to lose with hyperinflation. And finally, let's have a look at what could be a possible hyperinflation portfolio. So we're going to look at commodities like gold and silver and different things that people are still going to need to turn into things. Stocks and bonds, or a bond index that will follow the bond market. And for this, you'd probably want to have a little bit more in stocks than bonds. Real estate usually does quite well. Leveraged loans, where you're lending to companies that might not be doing so well. Now they can use these higher amounts of cash to pay off a debt which probably isn't increasing, and it's much easier for them to pay off their debt. And then finally, we have TIPS, which stands for Treasury Inflation Protected Securities. Now, these don't perform very well when there isn't high inflation, so keep that in mind. These only tend to do well when CPI is higher than what the market anticipates. That's when TIPS do well. So since we're talking about hyperinflation in the USA, I've called them TIPS. But technically speaking, if we were to talk about Australia, they also exist, and they're called Treasury Indexed Bonds. And I'm going to give you one more, and this one I believe is the most important. Talk to people. So the best experience comes from other people, people who've been through financial challenges, people who are doing better than you are. Learn how to approach them, learn how to win their trust, and learn how to implement some of the things that they teach you that are going to help you to become just like them. Okay, I'm not going to go into any of these in any further detail. We can do that in future videos. This topic has just gone completely out of control. This is going to be a very short video about the money supply, and then as I started researching, I just found more and more and more, and it's taken hours, but it's been worth it to put this video together. So if you learned something from this video, give us a like. Hit that subscribe button and hit that notification bell so we can let you know when there's more great videos. And leave a comment if you have any questions or have any topics you'd like us to discuss. Thanks for watching, and remember, investing is a game, and if you have fun, you're going to get the kinds of returns that you deserve and dream of.